direct transmission of spiritual forces into the pond, if we're attentive to those, we experience what is we call the real intuition from the spirit world.
So when we talk about the difference between living beings and non-living objects, they have a lot in common. We have chemical properties and the physical forces of the world and all that in common with the metal chairs and the carpet and the walls and the glass. What is it that we have beyond that?
Right. What happens is that when things become living, what happens is the various etheric energies create a nucleus. Well, first you really have the 5 elements, the 5 fundamental conditions. These 5 fundamental conditions begin to sort of come in conflict and sort of bounce off of each other. Now that creates energy. Actually, in a sense, that is where the etheric forces come from. Now, there's 2 processes in yoga, one called Shanchara and one called Pratyakshanchara. And one is moving away from, let's just say, for lack of a better word, God. They use say Brahma Purusha, and one is moving toward. So in this process of moving away from, there is no real material world as we know. There are only these subtle fundamental factors, and there are 5 fundamental factors. And they're usually of a vibrational quality. That's what people usually talk about when they talk about Om. Om is the first vibrational quality that actually what is called the etheric emerges from. Out of the etheric emerges what is called the touch tanmatra, or the the air vibration. And the air vibration will have etheric and the air vibration in it. And then the luminous vibration, or luminous factor, and then the water factor, and then the solid factor. But these are factors, probably more in the sense that they meant them in ancient Greece. They're not earth, they're not water, but they're qualitative etheric qualities. They're etheric things that have these qualities in a way. These fundamental factors then begin to interact, and really you can say their energy is released in that interaction. Well, what's released in that interaction is what we call the etheric energy. And so that released etheric then becomes the basis for the physical world and the living world, everything we see. The difference between the purely physical world that we see, in a sense, when we look at the material world, we're looking really almost directly at the fundamental factors in their conflict with one another. But there's been no establishing of a center or a nucleus among those fundamental elements. And once a nucleus is established and all those vital areas then work in a cooperative way, we have a living reality, something that is living. And then that living reality begins to evolve. And it evolves through stages where it's primarily expressing itself in a physical way, in terms of the primitive life. And then what emerges next is the vital energy itself. Some of it is freed from the living activity. See, first, the lowest level of living, the vital energy, is totally subsumed in the living quality. And then a little bit of that etheric is freed. And when it's freed, you have the plant, you have what we call the real organized plant world. And then we have a little bit of that, then we have what is called the astral is freed. A different quality of information that's also there is freed from the work of maintaining the living organism. And then we have the animal world. And then, again, what we can call the individuality or the ego forces are somewhat freed from maintaining the living activity. And then we have what we would call the potential for human existence. So in a sense, the information that the prana, that informs the prana, is freed at each level. And the information that we can talk, that the spiritual information that informs the prana is free in our existence. So there's physical information that's informing the prana, and there's spiritual information that's forming the prana into a body-mind. as long as all the information, in a sense, is engaged totally in maintaining the living activity of that being, then we don't have consciousness. But in a sense, in the very living itself, it evolves so that, say, the physical nature can take over some of the spiritual activities. You can again get what that is. The spiritual work is such that it actually ends up organizing the physical in such a way that it actually begins to take over higher functions and frees the spiritual information to be available for what we call consciousness. And so that's the evolutionary process that goes on. Just to reiterate, the general idea is that you have these fundamental factors, 5 of them. They, in a sense, coming up in an interaction that generates energy. That energy then finds a center or a balance point. And when it finds a balance point, you have living things. When it's not in balance, you have the material world. When it comes in balance, then you have the material world plus this living activity now. And then there's other information that comes from the spiritual world that informs that. What the spiritual world does is take that material living thing that is developed and really, in a sense, encodes in it how it can then become more subtle. It's like it brings in a new technology. It says, you're doing this all the wrong way. It's not going to be this hard. Why don't you develop this little subtle system, called, you need to have a circulatory system. Well, the circulatory system is information that comes from the spiritual world that the physical then takes up and becomes a part of heredity. So that's how evolution takes place. The spiritual information comes in, informs the etheric body how to organize the physical aspect in a more subtle way. And then that's passed on as heredity. You don't really have evolution moving up from the physical. It's not random chance the way that, modern science looks like it. So that's sort of the model. And so we come to now where we're conscious human beings and we have this etheric body-mind. And we want to now consciously put ourselves more in direct contact with the source of evolution. It's been happening, because of grace. Grace comes in, causes these changes, and evolution takes place by grace. But then as conscious human beings, we say, okay, we're going to quiet this stuff, so we are aware when this radiant energy comes in and can consciously begin to be a part of that activity, as opposed to unconsciously be a part of that activity. The intuition that begins to flow through us by this quieting of the other 3. Quieting of the material influence on the etheric, the quieting of the what we call the imaginative influence on the etheric, sensation and perception, and the quieting of the feeling aspect, the emotional, psychophysical aspect. We quiet those 3, and then we can notice what of that activity in our being has a spiritual source. It's of the radiant heat from the sun, as a metaphor for the spiritual source.
I can't quite get to how you know that. You're saying the evidence that that's coming is in a willed action. It's not in an intuitive knowing. It's not in a feeling place.
Right. And a willed action, what is a willed action but a spontaneous action in the prana? We talk about will, the body, mind is prana. So now we don't have to wait for it to manifest out here in our limbs. We quiet ourselves and we see the prana act. We see the prana move in a certain kind of way, make a certain adjustment. And that adjustment is a translation of something that's coming purely from the spiritual world. So when we're quiet, we actually, we don't stand outside and experience the ripples in the water from the shore. We're in the water, with the water itself, and in our own consciousness we experience new ripples within our being. So before they actually manifest in the motor organs. What you will also read about is this concept of the sthira bhumi. For the sthira bhumi is formed by the contraction of the prana. The prana is contracting and expanding. When the prana contracts, the sthira bhumi becomes strengthened. That means we can receive information from the spiritual world, from outside of ourselves, and hold on to it and be receptive to it. Now usually here's how the prana is going. You got this arrhythmic kind of So the sthira bhumi isn't ever really formed in a way that makes it a real strong apperceptive organ. So what we're trying to do is slow this down. Slow it down, and even in the end, stop it in the contracted state. That's what that holding of the breath is about in pranayama. First we get it rhythmically moving. And after we get it good rhythmically moving, we actually say, let's let it pause for a minute. And in that pause, in that cessation, we become totally open to that radiant information. We also become open to all the other information too, but in a sense we do, but the radiant information, but we can now, select out in that experience. And that's what we're trying to do with the pranayama, is get that process to slow first, make it bigger, longer, slower breath, and then experience the prana still. And then out of that experience, we become aware of that radiant heat that then is and how it's informing our being. And then we're able to then see the action just before it takes place. And then I'm able to see the impulse to touch the toe, from inside rather than just from the outside. And then that's when I'm kind of working out of an intuitive place. Now I'm aware of what the impulses should be in the world, the impulses I'm having to move into the world before I actually do them. I have to reflect on them. Okay. So the practice I gave you, the practice of exploration that I gave you,